Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm Paul Fain. I'm the news editor with Inside Higher Ed. And while we don't have a banned words list Inside Higher Ed, unique is one of them I don't like to see, because really there's not too much in higher ed that's unique or even frankly new. This is an exception. The relationship between Purdue and Kaplan when it first crossed the transom for me was actually kind of hard to believe that I was even reading the press release correctly. And since then I've written many, many thousands of words about it and still have a lot to learn, frankly. So we have a really short session here. I'm going to jump right in. It's quite a complex story here. I'm not going to read the full bios of my illustrious co-panelists here, but Andy Rosen, the chairman and CEO of Kaplan Inc., is to my left. To his left is Steve Schultz, the legal counsel from Purdue University, and then Frank Dooley, the senior vice provost for teaching and learning and a professor of agricultural economics at Purdue. So you're 2 weeks in since getting approval and getting Purdue Global off the ground, and could you talk about where things are, how it works as it stands now, and who wants to go first? We'll start.
Well, you gave us the caveat. We're 2 weeks in, but Purdue Global, and that's the name for Kaplan, so it's Purdue University Global. I can give you a couple snippets, if you would. One of the things we've done, there's a benefit for Purdue employees, and we offered it to them, thinking, maybe a couple hundred would indicate that they want to get a degree and complete their. My administrative assistant is one. She has an associate's degree. Well, we have, I think now, close to 670 who've signed up to become, looking to go in Kaplan as for their degrees. The thing that we're seeing is one of the things that they've done that a traditional university, we don't spend a lot of time telling our story in marketing. And one of the things that they've been very good at in this online world is they know how to use the brand and to tell the story. So we've seen an uptick in the number of hits, because we already had some online programs, and all of a sudden we go, well, where'd this come from? And so that obviously is one of the things. But the real enrollment we probably won't see until the fall, because believe it or not, these adult learners tend to follow the typical cycle of I go to school and I start in August or September.
In terms of the how it's going with in the relationship, the word you used at the top, Paul, feel great about it. We've felt great about it since the first conversation. We've been working together for 15 months, and as a deal lawyer, anytime you do an acquisition, you wonder about how the integration is going to go, and how things. And that there are going to be things that you'll have to work out. You're planning for the closing, and they're going to, once the rubber meets the road, you're going to have to work things out post-closing. And we're working through those things right now, but the fact of the matter is that we'd already been working together, hitting key milestones for 15 months now, so we feel great about the relationship, even though it's still early.
And all the regulatory approvals are in at this point. Now it's full steam ahead.
That's right. We had 3 key approvals we had to get. Indiana Commission for Higher Education, because we're a state public institution. We also had to get Department of Education Title IV approval, and finally our common accreditor in the Higher Learning Commission had to approve the change of control, and that last one was the final one that we got. We got that, I believe, March 5th, and we closed on March 22nd.
And Paul, I think you wrote about the expectation of some observers that there would be a huge culture clash and the parties would never get along. You put that pretty high up in your stories. And I think, in fact, as you've heard, the relationship between Purdue and Kaplan has been excellent from the beginning, and the interpersonal relationships, not just the sort of organizational relationships, have been very strong. There's some people here, Greg Marino and Betty Vandenbosch and Lisa Sicilian, they transferred 30,000 students overnight from Kaplan University to Purdue Global, 2,200 employees. The website went from purple to black and gold, just really a very crisp process. And so I think we kind of feel like, as Frank said, 2 weeks in, we're feeling like we're at the starting gates. We've laced up our shoes and we're ready to go. This being higher education, you have to get approval for what shoes you wear, and you've got to solicit and consider all advice on whether to wear socks and what kind of socks, and you need 1,000 pages of assurance that your shoelaces will remain double tied, and so that's why it took a year for us to get the approval. But now we're approved, and so far so good. But I mean, it's going to be months or years before we can really tell whether we've got something here.
I think to go with the shoe analogy is we're lacing up to run a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, to that end, what's success in 5 or 10 years out? What are you all shooting for?
Well, I mean, I think from the academic world, what you always think of success is students who complete, right? And by definition, Purdue Global, that is their mission. So they've started with students who somewhere along the line didn't complete, and they're coming back, and now they're having this second chance, if you would, and that's what they've been doing for a long time. I think one of the things, and we had Clayton Christensen on campus about a month ago that he was talking to us, and his advice to us is, whatever you do, leave them alone, because they know what they're doing and they're good in that space. So one of the things, if you compare us to some of like ASU Online, one of the things that's really different is ASU Online, relatively speaking, their online programs are very similar to their campus programs, and the student bodies are very similar. Whereas we have something that looks like this and this. And so we're going to influence ourselves in both directions, if you would. So one of the things that I think is somewhat unique about this transaction is going with the market differentiation approach. What makes us successful? Down the road, what I think makes it successful, are we able to influence ourselves in both? Because there are commonalities, like you started, education's education until you ran across this thing. So what can we learn on the West Lafayette campus that they've been doing for the past decade that is really a smart way to do education? I can give you a couple things. They look at every course in every program every 3 years. We still have at least one professor who's still using acetates, okay? And I can tell you how it's hard to find light bulbs for these old machines, if you would, okay? So when you keep that idea that I'm constantly updating my materials and keeping my stuff fresh, that's something that we can bring to our campus that's very different and probably a very helpful thing. That they think in terms of student success. What does that mean? There are common policies that I don't get to have a different late policy than Steve does, than Andy does. This is the late policy, this is the integrity policy, and they apply across the campus, and as a student, you don't have to try to figure out how to traverse this class versus that class. So those are some of the things we're having conversations on with our professors, and when you put it in, being a professor, we tend to think, we don't do a lot of training for people who are going to be professors. We just basically say, here's a syllabus, here's the book I used, that's a good one, you should do it. And that's about as far as we go with training on a lot of campuses. And what Global had done, it's a minimum of 20 hours before they let somebody start to work with students. Now, one of the reasons this deal, where cultures come together, for the last 5 years, we've had a program on campus where we have been working with professors to make them better teachers. And we're investing an entire semester of their time. And we've had close to 400 of our professors go through that program at this point. So the notion of rethinking what you're doing with your classes and how you come at it, that's where I think some of the culture problems aren't there, because this makes sense to us when we have the conversation.
I know I'm a reporter, so I know that the Kaplan at least talked about a similar deal with other universities. What about Purdue made it the right fit? Obviously there are differences between the institutions, but where were you kind of heading in the same direction?
Well, I've talked about this in other forums. I think that, and I've long felt that Purdue, more than any other American university, has balanced becoming an elite institution with a mission of access. And so you can feel it on the Purdue campus that even though it's become one of our top universities, the people there and the institution as a whole really cares about what it's doing to serve the community and how can we bring more people in as opposed to push people out. So that sort of culture was really important to us as we thought about what would make the perfect partner. And then of course it's got a leadership team represented here, but led by Mitch Daniels, that knows how to get things done. That doesn't focus on the manicured, meandering path, but rather, where do we want to get and how can we get there most directly? And so the combination of leadership and culture made Purdue, a partner that I can't imagine that we could find a better one.
Mitch Daniels does seem to be able to get things done in a rather expedited manner for a traditional university president. Just one quick follow-up on that. How do you see Kaplan's students changing at Purdue Global, or where do you see consistency and change going forward?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean. The student experience, you mean?
Actually, the students that you attract, that you serve.
I mean, we're going to have to see over time. I do think that the Purdue Global name will probably attract a somewhat different student base, but Kaplan University embraced a population that didn't have access to really good alternatives. And Purdue Global will continue to embrace that same population, but I think that there probably will be some others who find it attractive.
And our board and President Daniels made very clear that it was reaching that very population that was the central objective of why Purdue wanted to do the deal. It's an extension of our land grant mission, reaching these working adults, and giving them affordable access.
Absolutely. It sounds maybe quaint to some at this event, but there were, and probably still are, some worries about brand dilution, the Purdue brand. Obviously, you're not the first traditional university to go online in a big way, but what's kind of your response to that concern on campus and beyond?
Well, I think it's something we have to, let me give you a couple ways to think about it. There are areas where, let's pick nursing might be a good profession. There's a nationwide shortage of nurses, right? And I have a nursing program on the West Lafayette campus that puts out some amazing young students who are highly sought. We're actually doubling the number of nursing students on the West Lafayette campus, and we're in the midst of that. Purdue Global has a nursing program as well. The nurses that are going to graduate from us typically are going to go to work in some of the larger hospitals and clinics across, but they're going to work in an intensive care unit. They're going to work, charge nurses and things like that, and they take on leadership positions in a very quick time frame. Most of the nurses who come to us from Purdue Global, on the other hand, started working as maybe a med tech, or they're an LPN, and the hospital, guess what? They want both of them. I need the people to staff this area of the hospital. I need the nurses to staff this area. So some of these areas, it's not a question of dilution, but it's actually probably an opportunity of saying, we now have the complete portfolio of workers that you're looking for in this particular kind of case. Other areas, it's not as easy as that sometimes, and that's, I think as we move through, it's really, I think it's the question of how do you pull Purdue Global into Purdue as an overall arching brand. I'm an ag economist, and ag economists live with the commodities, right? So you typically don't want to ask me the brand question, But I would say that what we really need to do is we need to be careful to explain who we are, when we are, what we are, and just keep telling our story over and over again. We've been careful on the admissions site before this even launched. We brought the people from Global to campus, and they sat with our admissions people. So what if somebody calls your office? Well, here, just transfer them to this number. And some of that happens. But the most important thing is to get the student to the campus who's got the best ability to serve them and what they're trying to accomplish. And it has to go both ways.
If I could just add to that, I could spend the next 10 minutes talking about how Kaplan University served a population of students in a way that far outperformed the rest of American higher education. You've heard me talk about this, I think. In terms of satisfaction, graduation rates, employment rates, income, feeling that their college education drove their employment success. And so you'd think, well, that's actually a brand enhancer to any institution. But the question which gets posed to anybody who's trying to do something different in higher ed is, well, it's a different modality that you're using or a different set of students. And whether you serve them with excellence or not is less important than whether you're serving that same population in the same way. And what Purdue did, what they could have done is said, we're going to try to protect the existing Purdue brand from anybody thinking we're doing something different. And then they would have rejected this idea. Or they could say, we're a land-grant institution whose job is to serve the community that we're part of. And there are working adults who don't have access to excellence, and we need to help provide that. That's what Mitch Daniels did. That's what Purdue did. And I think that over the course of the next decade, the Purdue brand will be greatly enhanced by the fact that it's not only able to provide excellence to 18 to 22-year-olds who are offered lots of opportunities for excellence, but because they're able to provide excellence to the whole community that needs it, and they're doing their job as a public institution.
In a way, this is history repeating itself because the very same thing, a similar thing happened after World War II when Purdue, West Lafayette decided to expand and create regional campuses up near the steel mills of Gary and up in Fort Wayne where there was some auto manufacturing activity to give these guys who came back from the war a chance to go to college on the GI Bill in ways that they would not have been able to do. They wouldn't have been able to get to West Lafayette to do that. So this is, for the 21st century, another extension of the land-grant mission in the same way that that was for the latter part of the 20th century.
Well, that sets us up for looking beyond Purdue Global. Obviously, a lot of change in higher education. Do you see other universities attempting a similar move? And there's nothing quite like what you're doing, but a lot of change in the for-profit sector. There's conversions going on. There's OPM partnerships. What do you see coming next and others emulating what you do? Andy, you want to start that one?
I think that this transaction was something that was responsive to an inquiry that had been going on at Purdue for a number of years and a set of goals. And similarly, an assessment on Kaplan's part about what, where the future led and what was the best set of steps. And those two merged, those two sort of linked together in a way that was quite unusual and was, I think, in some ways unique. So I don't think that any other two institutions would have the exact same sort of dynamics. Having said that, I think that there will be other institutions that decide they want to serve the working adult population in a bigger way, and so they're going to start thinking about ways to do that. I think that there's a lot of activity on the for-profit side, but some of those things are motivated by, they have different motivations behind them than this transaction. So I think it's, we've talked about this. When we went through this process, it wasn't because we're trying to, say something about higher education to the world. It's a set of problems, particularly at Purdue, that Purdue is trying to solve, and we're trying to solve those problems. Not, you can go to this conference and hear a lot about, all the problems of higher education. This was a set of issues that collectively we thought we could address, and this was a good way of doing it.
I mean, when you look at other really monumental changes, if you would, is Western governors might be another example of somebody who really came out with a very different mold. And there is a Western governors in Indiana, and a number of people have talked to us, well, aren't you just another Western governors? No, we have an entirely different educational model in how we work with students, so we're very distinct from them. But yet you look at Western governors and the collaboration they have across the country, I think we need to look to models like this. You go read Mike Crow's book, and he talks about the national serving universities, and he's saying somewhere around 10 of these institutions need to stand up to serve this adult learner population across the country. Well, we're one. You know, you can argue Western Governors is 2, so Arizona State is 3, now there's 7 more. Where do they come from? I don't know. I think it's people who are willing to, you have to think out of the box, because I'll say the one thing, and I don't know that I could even begin to do this, is there's not a good playbook. And whoever does it next is going to have a different set of circumstances that they're facing. You know, they might be in a state that there's a union contract that we didn't have. So the circumstances are going to really dictate, and you're going to have to be somewhat flexible as you get there. I think one of the advantages for whoever's next is, as we've gone through the HLC approval, we've made them think of some issues that they hadn't thought of before, and I think we got to a good place with them when it was all said and done. And I think all along, I'll say the regulators all along, we're asking good questions and the right question, and we're going to make it easier for the next ones coming forth, is what I would suggest.
I don't know how easily it can be replicated. I agree with what Andy and Frank both said, but I would just emphasize that to the extent folks are looking to structure a similar arrangement where, you know, you have the academic operations, you know, in our case, for example, in a public institution, online institution, backed by this high caliber support services organization over a long-term contract, it's just vitally important, going back to what Andy was saying earlier, that you approach it from a relationship culture and not a transactional culture. It's not just, you know, we're not just transacting and doing this deal. We're in it together, and as these guys both said, we're in it together for the long term. So I don't know how replicable that is, but that's going to be a key ingredient for any 2 parties that want to try to do something similar.
And by long term, it's a 30-year contract,
That's right.
among other things. So,
30-year renewable.
renewable, that's right, doesn't mean it ends. So, you know, one of the pieces that I feel like really captured people's attention, including reporters, is the kind of blurred boundaries. I mean, it's one thing to think about a private nonprofit partnering with a proprietary education provider, but a public land grant. You know, do you feel like this was a notable blurring of boundaries in higher ed, and should people take note of that? You know, I think it scares some, but you know, what's your kind of response to the change and just the blurring?
My position was always that it was very clear cut. And we made sure that the documents would reflected that. That's the legal answer. But, you know, we wanted to, Purdue wanted to, of the 3 boxes that we could choose, obviously having a proprietary institution at the federal level, you know, the 3 boxes at the federal level, proprietary, 501c3, nonprofit, and public. We knew that going for a public institution was the most consistent with our objective in terms of the land grant mission and so forth. And we found a way to do that. The Department of Education ultimately agreed with us that characterizing Purdue Global as a public institution was proper and a correct outcome. So again, it may have been blurry in terms of being a new way of proposing that's how it could be done, but now that it's accepted, maybe it's more clear-cut for others that come behind us. I don't know.
So go ahead, Andy.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, again, I think Purdue, by you know, in the way you asked the question, Purdue is a blurred institution already in the sense that it's a, you know, again, it's a elite institution with these regional campuses that are much more practical and working, you know, student-oriented and so on. And I personally think Kaplan University was blurred in a sense that, you know, if you've, you know, looked into sort of Kaplan University's focus on learning science and a research pipeline and things like that.
There's a lot of nonprofit partners beyond Purdue.
Yeah, that's right. Other partners and so on. So, you know, it's when those 2 pieces blurred into each other that people sort of came and take notice. But actually, that story could have been told a year ago before all this, you know, came to be.
So how global is it going to be? You know, you think about a state university, you know, Arizona State has a building 3 blocks from my office in DC, so obviously state universities live far beyond their state borders, but is this going to be a truly global institution?
If I could just say,
I think
we're 2 weeks in. I think we want to get multiple counties in Indiana, you know, going, and maybe in a year or 2 years we could talk more about,
Yeah, it's fair.
you know, global.
Well, let's wrap on that. Obviously, we could have had a bigger room and a lot more time to talk about this great topic. I hope we'll give a good round of applause to my panel.